Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. I hope you're having a good time. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy. These strange days have really changed us in a lot of ways. We had a bit of a get-together around here outside and safe distance and nice air circulation in the backyard for my beloved's birthday. And the energy that people had of just being able to see each other and talk more than two at a time was really quite incredible. Everybody was double vaxxed who showed up. I made sure of that. And so we had a good, safe, and fabulous time. But it made me realize how much we have lost in the last year and a half, how much of human connection we have lost. You know, there were those days where you didn't want to go out, you didn't want to see people. And now we're sort of in that place, but for a different reason, because we've sort of lost a lot by having this plague, this virus that is so insidious, and so many people seem to have a problem being able to take seriously, and endangering other people with all that. And then how do you talk to each other, and how do you have a hard conversation, and what happens to friendships, and all these things are in play. And it's a real challenge. There's no doubt about it. A real challenge. We're just finishing a cycle of high holidays as I record this particular episode of Not That Kind of Rabbi. And I just wanted to wish everybody of the Jewish faith Chag Sameach. A Chag is a holiday and Sameach is a good one. So have a happy holidays. We've had the Jewish New Year, the Day of Atonement. We have had Jewish Thanksgiving, Sukkot. And now we're wrapping up with the beginning of the cycle of the Torah readings again. We read them in order. Some friends of mine are priests, and I said, do you guys have an order? And they said, no, we pick things and we use them every week. And I thought, wow, we never do that. Whatever is next is next. And we do it on the lunar calendar. So, we all have different wells that we dig down into the same river. And I think we're all trying to get, whether we have a religion or a spiritual path, or even a secular, completely secular path. I think we're all looking for purpose and meaning and a way to be with each other that brings us more joy than sadness. So to everybody going through all of this, I'm really with you. A few details for me personally. One is, if you like this podcast or even love this podcast, which would be wonderful, I do have a Patreon account, and it is patreon.com/NTKR. That's Not That Kind of Rabbi, NTKR. So if you would like to donate any amount per month, that would be a lovely thing. And I'll certainly reach out to you. And I have individualized blogs that I do there for the group that supports the podcast. So that would be wonderful. I'd really appreciate it. The other piece of news from my output in life right now is, as of today, I think we still have 2 more days of pre-order before it's actually available through Amazon or Chapters Indigo or my publishers, Woolsack and Wynn. I have a book that has just come out called I Thought He Was Dead, a spiritual memoir, and have had wonderful feedback. I have to say, I don't write books for a living. So it's been a strange experience to write one and think, I don't know, is this any good? But I've had some people I really look up to and trust who have said that they enjoyed the book. So there's an excerpt available from the book on at the CJN. The Canadian Jewish News has published an excerpt from the book, and you can also just go to my Facebook site, Ralph Ben-Murgy on Facebook, and you'll see some comments and stuff there from people who read it. So I'm excited. I Thought He Was Dead is now out, and I appreciate any support that you desire to give to that particular project. All right, speaking of books, I have my guest of this particular episode, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. Yesh and I are friends in a profound way, because we've both been through some wonderful training as spiritual directors. It's called the Hashpa'ah program. It's part of the Aleph ordination program in the United States. And we were mashed together with a group of people who thought, this might be a good idea. So we got together every, 5 months or so. We'd usually go to this place out Freeman, Colorado, I think it was, just outside of
Broomfield.
Broomfield, that's it. Broomfield, Colorado, just
if you're asking.
I'm asking, outside of Denver, to do our trainings over a 3-year period. We did our spiritual directing work together, and I was the only, except for one of the rabbis who teaches the program, I was the only other Canadian in the room at the time. So I got to know my American cousins well. One thing I will say before we start the conversation is, we here in Canada look at America from a distance, but also from great proximity. They're just over there. But whenever I am in America, I feel very Canadian. I feel like there's a different set of things in play in America than there are in my home country of Canada. But I also realize how impermanent all of that is. I mean, I wasn't born in Canada, but I live in Canada. And now all of a sudden I'm a Canadian. But for 500 years, I was something else. I was a Moroccan. So, it's all kind of fleeting, and it's best not to attach too much to it. But the work that Yesh and I did together was wonderful and meaningful work. And he's written his own book now. See, this is book day. We got book day going. Second book, by the way. This one's called Unthinkable Dreams, the year that my mom died and the towers fell. And Yesh Balin is my guest on Not That Kind of Rabbi. How are you, sir?
Excellent. Thank you for having me. It's a real honor and a pleasure. And kol hakavod on your book. I didn't know you had.
Right back at you. Yeah.
Very good.
It's a fun thing.
No small feat.
No small feat, but I don't know. How do you find the writing experience, actually?
I love the writing experience. Most of the time, the evolution of this book was unusual in a sense that a good portion of the book comes right out of my journals from 2001. And it sat on the shelf for about 18 years. And then I opened it up, and it was almost like looking at a piece of text and saying, well, what's in here that I can learn from this and expand on? So it was an exploration in the last 3 years of working on it, which was really fun.
So what made you reach over into the bookshelf and go, I think I need to do something with this?
I wonder if I know the answer to that. As you mentioned, I had written a previous book, A Precious Heritage, which is a collection of my favorite of my father's 800 sermons. He was a Reform rabbi, mostly on Long Island through the 50s and 60s. And I read 800 sermons and picked the ones I liked best and annotated them and expanded on them. So that was something devoted to my father in particular, and it was a legacy gift for my family. And in one sense, it was maybe time to provide something of a very different sort to honor my mother and pass on her legacy.
Why is that important? For other people, it's not important. Why was it important to you to honor your parents these ways?
It could be, and this is, I would probably have to get a little bit more therapy to be sure. It could be that it was a process of tshuva, where this is the season of atonement and turning back to our better selves. And for me, my relationship with my parents wasn't terrible, but I think all of us have ways that we can learn from our parents that we forgot to do it while they were here on earth. So in a way, it was atonement, it was reconnection, forgiveness, compassion. And as it turns out, it was very therapeutic for me, since they're not necessarily observing the results of all this labor, although somebody might argue they are. But for me, it was very therapeutic.
Atonement. Tell me how that weaves its way into your relationship with your parents, and particularly in this case, your mother.
Um, well, my father, being the rabbi, was, and this was in the era before work-life balance was a concept. He was rarely around, and then he died relatively young. So my mother's influence was profound, and she and I probably have a very similar nervous system anyway. Very artistic, outlandish, noisy. Multidimensional, and I say, honestly, those apply to me. My father was a more reverent, introspective gentleman, and there came a point in my life where I realized that I needed to connect to some of my father's energy, and I probably didn't do such a good job of pushing my mother's energy aside. And so, I owed her a little bit of or maybe I needed to seek a little forgiveness for her, and reconnect to the parts that I had pushed away, at least temporarily.
It's so interesting because you honored your father, who was already honored by other people as a rabbi, public-facing figure, and then there's this piece of you that says, I've neglected in some way my mother. Is that right?
Well, I think it was more like a ping pong match. It went back and forth. In the early years, I had no really strong connection with my dad. I was totally connected to my mom, her little boy, the baby of the family. And we loved a lot of the same things. So, there was a natural connection. It took some effort to move in the direction of my father. And so, kind of pushed her aside. And now I feel really after these two books that this has been a kind of a sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious goal for many years, is to be able to sit comfortably with the very different, and these were polar opposite people, to really absorb the best of both of these people who helped put me into this world, essentially, and to really love and honor both of them. That's what the Torah tells us to do, right? The Ten Commandments tell us that.
Yeah. But in this kind of a society, there are times where we don't. We don't need to live near our parents. We don't. We live alone. We live in our own nuclear families, and mothers and fathers kind of melt into the background for a lot of people. For other people, they end up being people they care for. When you start this book, we're kind of meeting your mother in a very vulnerable place. Tell me about where you begin in this book.
Well, the first chapter, and this came after a lot of feedback from some of my early readers and critics of the book. I begin with the journal entry from September 11th, 2001, the day of the terrorist attacks. That was not just pivotal in the history of the United States. It was pivotal for our family. Mom had died 2 days before that. And all of a sudden, all of our plans for transporting her body and for transporting ourselves to have a funeral and a normal Jewish mourning process, which is a really rich and powerful and therapeutic process, it got torn asunder along with all the other destruction of that day. So the spine of the book, not the literal spine, but the thread, is the journal entries from September 11th through the rest of the year. And there are numerous flashbacks in between, which tell about the several months before her death, which was a story in itself, where my sister, my brother, and I supported Mom as she came to her end. And we discovered things about her. We listened to her in new ways. We heard a spirituality and a love of Yiddishkeit that she had never really pronounced in all of her previous life. I mentioned that she and my dad were polar opposites in so many ways. He was a product of Providence, Rhode Island, and a real scholar always. My mother grew up in the South, born in Savannah, raised in Louisville. My father became a rabbi, and he was raised in a a very conservative, if not orthodox environment. My mother was fairly assimilated. And then their nervous systems being as different as they were. So these were very different people.
So there's so much in that first chapter alone. It's just like, whoa, like just whoa, because, trying to make sense of your mother dying and trying to make sense of the Twin Towers going down in the same week. What are some of the things that went through you? Like, I can't even imagine. What did it do?
From the beginning, that first day, after kind of absorbing as much of CNN footage as we could take, I said, wait a second, my mom died 2 days ago. I don't know what's going on. I talked to the rabbi. He said, take care of yourself. Go leave the TV. And I went down to about a mile from my house is the San Francisco Bay, a favorite spot for walking, meditating, writing, and I wrote there. That fed my soul. And part of what I wrote is, how do I accommodate my grief in the midst of this huge national, international grief and mourning that was going on? I'll give you one example from the book, and that is that evening of September 11th, my daughter and I went to a local congregation, actually 4 local synagogues that come together for a memorial service. Seemed like a right thing to do. One of the elders of my congregation came up to me to offer condolences. I thought that was also appropriate. And I told him I was, it's difficult balancing my grief with everything else that's going on in the world. And he said something to me that I'm sure he meant well, but it did not come out well. He said, well, your mother's death is insignificant in the face of what happened today. No, that was not exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. I said, her death was not insignificant. It was just different. So it was a real push-pull.
Knowing you.
Yeah. I said it nicely, really.
Okay. Because I'm thinking you could have just turned on this guy and gone, what kind of a schmuck says that today, right?
Well, knowing me, and you didn't know my mother, but she was perfectly capable of doing almost anything you can imagine at that moment.
Well, that's an enormous amount of restraint, I must say, Yesh. Very good. Very good. So was part of the struggle to make sense of this, not the macro event of the towers, but of your mother, is the interruption of the idea of what you should and could have done in terms of mourning, the week of Shiva, the burial, all of these things. How did you navigate this world? And what cracks did it form in your relationships and your family?
Apparently you've read the book, because you know that it did form some cracks, or at least expose them. Well, the challenge, of course, is that we don't begin our ritual mourning process until after interment. And with the body stuck on the West Coast and the grave on the East Coast, we didn't know when that was going to happen. All the planes were down in the United States for several days. So, we really didn't know what to do. And then just a day later on September 12th, my brother, who at that time, my brother of blessed memory, at that time, he was a rabbi also in Florida. So 3-hour time zones ahead of us. And he called to say he had just conducted a Shiva, a morning ritual in his home. And I said, wait, what do you mean you just conducted a Shiva? He says, well, during time of war, the halakha, the law is that you start your Shiva, but even before the body has been returned. If the body can't be returned, you just start the Shiva anyway. And I said, well, that may or may not make sense. Are we at war? Maybe the planes will start flying. Maybe we could still have a funeral. But what was difficult about that is we had spent so many hours, months preparing for what we would do in the inevitable eventuality of my mother's death, that for him to kind of go off on his own and start something and not tell his brother and sister about it till after the fact, it was a bit galling. And that was the beginning of a uncomfortable few days between the two of us. It got a little, go ahead.
No, you talk about it, not creating the cracks, but revealing them. What did it reveal about the relationships between you and your brother?
My brother is 5 years older than I. And so he was out of the house while I was still kind of growing up, and typically lived distant from me. So there were obvious separations. In fact, you started the conversation just earlier talking about connection. And that's one of the three themes of the book. The book is divided into separation, compassion, and connection. And so this was a piece of the separation that maybe always was there, but what was also always there, and you referred to this earlier as well, is our need for connection. And there was never a time when there wasn't at least hidden within my breast, if not in my consciousness, a need to connect with my brother. And so that's really one of the, not a spoiler alert, by the time we get to the end of the year, the journal entries described how we really did come together as a family.
You know, one of the things I think I intuited about you when we first met and we took some walks together was that there were some pieces of who you were that you might have to struggle with forgiveness for people, that there might be a certain judgment. And I didn't see it in a dark way. I just saw it as your journey of wanting to be better at being able to let those things go. And in the book, I really felt like that was a real journey of, I can either hold on to this and, grudge my way through my relationship with my brother, or I can't. And you wouldn't be alone, because a lot of people, when they're faced with internal issues of family and death and things like that, or marriage, any life cycle event can really split people up sometimes. Talk to me a bit about that journey for you, which you talk about in the book.
Well, thank you for putting it that way. I believe that part of it is an inherent value for family and family connection. And one that maybe was so ingrained that I probably wouldn't even have been able to voice it. Maybe didn't even know how important it was to me until maybe recognizing that not everybody goes around with that. I certainly have heard enough stories of siblings who have written each other off for life and see no reason whatsoever to ever try to bridge that gulf. I include in the book a poem that I wrote, not during this time period, but years before it, about my relationship with my brother. And it's one that just describes a morning when I was in kindergarten, and he was a first grade. No, he must have been a fifth grader or something, sixth grader. He was a lot bigger, and he rode me to school on his bicycle. And what it meant for me to be in his kind of little shelter, the sukkah of his arms as we're going to school. And then to realize that we had gone off in different directions for many years. But I was recalling that wonderful moment when we were together as brothers. And I read that to the rabbi at one time when I was struggling with my relationship with Jeff, my brother. And the rabbi said, "Do you realize how much yearning you have to be with your brother?" I said, "I didn't even know it was in the poem." It was just kind of a natural expression. So it was great bringing that to the surface. I describe in the book how I went out of my way to join Jeff at a rabbinical retreat that he went to every summer. I said, can I go with you to the Smoky Mountains, or I'm not good at geography, but someplace in North Carolina, to his retreat. And it was a wonderful place for us to get together. And I know you're very familiar with the Jewish men's retreats in Connecticut. I invited him to join me to my retreat center a few years later. And I'm glad to say, before his much too early death, that we had really connected in important ways.
What role did your sister play in all of this?
I am so happy that you asked that question, because so much of the conversation about the book tends to be, and rightly so, about what happened with Jeff and myself and that drama. But the months preceding Mom's death were extraordinarily, and I was very close. My sister and I are closer. I'm the baby, she's the middle child, so we were always a little bit closer. And in this period of time, we were closer geographically as well. And I could get down. I live in the Bay Area. She's in Southern California, where Mom spent her last year. So I could get down there frequently and be with my sister. But she was there all the time. You see this in a lot of families, taking the main responsibility for supporting Mom in her declining months. It was really important for us to have that time together. Just a few days ago, I gathered my sister and her children and my children and our grandchildren together so I could give them copies of the book. And one of the first things I did was I read the first paragraph of my acknowledgments is to my sister. None of this would have happened without her. So I have a great love and a debt of gratitude for her and all she did for Mom and with me, and just our sustaining relationship.
The other part of that can be sometimes that the two siblings who are aligned, and then the other sibling that's in another orbit, like Jeff, your brother, and that the two of you can sort of say, well, we don't need him in this orbit anymore. It can be tricky, right?
Well, I don't think we ever looked at it that way. There was one particular week during the summer before Mom's death where it just seemed a lot was coming up. I should mention that an important part of the summer and our conversation with Mom, for a while that was the working title of the book, was Conversations with Mom. So much of it was about what she had to say, and so much of what she had to say was irrational. And my wife, who has volunteered in grief counseling, brought to our attention a book that I would recommend called Final Gifts. The subtitle, I think I have the subtitle here. Understanding the Special Awareness, Needs, and Communications of the Dying. It was powerful in helping us to listen to Mom's seemingly irrational words and look at them as metaphors, almost like you interpret a dream and find out the meaning beneath the words. That absolutely opened up our dialogue, and it was so powerful. And so I mentioned that this one week when we discovered that, we really would love to have had Jeff there. But he was, not just because he was 3,000 miles, it happened to be the same week that he was off with his rabbinical retreat that summer. And he was where he needed to be. And we didn't have any misgivings about that. And we got together whenever we could, which, several times during that summer. And certainly, as the book describes, I already gave the spoiler alert, in December, the whole family got together and had the memorial service that we were denied when 9/11 disrupted the normal funeral.
You said at the beginning that in that last while with your mother, you learned a lot about her. What did you learn?
Well, primarily that she had a spiritual side. She even talked about seeing spirits, seeing my spirit hovering in the room. And we had never had any kind of occult or spiritual conversation in our entire lives. So that came as a surprise. she used the word Yiddishkeit, Jewishness, and described her love for Yiddishkeit. She talked about wanting to make sure that she was connected to God. This is not the mother I knew for all those years. She was such an iconoclast. She loved to break the mold as a rabbi's wife. She knew, we all knew, there never was one before like her or since. She was, feisty and just a real cut up. So to see this, and it wasn't even that she was so deeply serious all of a sudden. She was just open. She was gentle. She was relaxed. I get excited talking about it, but I also know that when I take the time to relax, I get on a different plane, and she was on that different plane. It was beautiful.
That is beautiful. And, sometimes people think that if someone knows they're dying, that they're trying to cling and grasp to something to have meaning out of it. But it doesn't sound like that's what she was going through. It sounds like she was just going through an availability, an openness. Is that how you would see it, or something else?
No, that's just right. She was relaxed. She was satisfied. She was happy. I remark in the book how I knew enough about her life, past and present, to know that she had had plenty to be upset about or angry about or remorseful about, as we all do. But she was content, and she was genuinely content. That was beautiful in itself.
Did it change the way you see dying?
Wow. I can't say change exactly. I'm not sure how much I had thought about it, but it certainly informed the way I would see dying. Years ago, I took a sequence of courses also with the Aleph Jewish Renewal Group that taught us the spiritual direction. They have it's now a part of an organization called Yerusha, a sequence of courses that Zalman Schachter Shalomi, of blessed memory, initiated on aging to saging.
I do them up here.
Yeah. Okay. One of the courses I took, it was on Death as Homecoming was the name of the course. And one of the first things we did was to design our death. Write down exactly how you want to see that experience. And I did that a long time ago. It must have been after Mom died. It was probably in the 20-teens sometime. But I don't know that I was consciously informed by my mother's death. But I did imagine a death for me where I would be receiving family members to my bedside and being able to give blessings, at which Mom did in her own way. It's nice to be able to, even if it's something you may never realize, but to create a vision of death that's not scary and painful, but peaceful and loving.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend who has got a very rare heart disorder, and there's a chance he won't be around, and there's a chance he will. He's just sort of living in the middle of it. But when he was told about this and told, really your chances are very good here, I asked him how he felt about it, and he said his first thought was, well, I guess I'm going home. And I thought, for others, it's just the terror of it all. And for others, it's the certainty that, there's an afterlife and it's going to be a certain way and you're going to be in it. But for him, it was a beautiful moment of just, so now I go home. And I just, when he told me that, I just wanted to cry because it was so perfect. It was so loving.
That's sweet.
Yeah, it was lovely. How do you deal with 9/11 in all of this?
My memories of 9/11 and how it's affected me?
Well, just how your mother's died, 9/11's happened. Do those things come together, or are they just like two really strangely different things?
Well, they're very connected, and I could answer that in two different time frames. One is, so mom died in September 9th. It just so happens I had a business trip to New York in November of 2001. And out of necessity, and my wife joined me on this business trip. We made a long weekend of it. And during that weekend, the first thing we did was go down to Ground Zero and spend some time at that site where that tragedy occurred that had a ripple effect. And as I think about it, it had a ripple effect with probably thousands, if not millions of people in different ways. But I just very conscious of the ripple effect it had in our lives and our family. And we went to the site and we paid respects. It really clarified and modified my understanding of 9/11 to be on site. There are personal notes and flowers and pictures and the kind of memorials that spring up in different places, but this was huge. The number of people who had made tributes to people that they had lost. And that kind of put a face on, it's not 3,000 people, it's one person at a time and their life story and the people that they've left behind. So, and then to stand there, and it happened to be a Saturday morning, and I had, some observant Jews are going to be going to say Kaddish, the memorial prayer for their losses every day for a year. For me, I was content with doing it every Shabbat. And it was a Shabbat morning, and I was standing there with all of this reminder of the death and destruction of that site. And it was only natural to recite Kaddish, not just because it was my mother's memory on another Shabbat morning, but for all the people there, and it didn't really even matter. And when tears came, I didn't stop and ask who these tears for. It was just a beautiful release in that moment. I said I'd give you in two time frames. The other time frame is this last 9/11, just a couple of weeks ago, was quite a confluence for me. So Thursday, 9/9/2021 was the 20th yard site of my mom. And then that weekend, 9/11 was on Shabbat. It was Shabbat Shuvah, the Sabbath between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Sabbath of return, the Sabbath of atonement. And to bring 9/11's anniversary and Shabbat Shuvah, my mother's yard site together, I actually gave the Devar Torah, the sermon, at my synagogue. And I was excited to give it at the little shtibel, the tiny little synagogue in Georgia, where my father delivered his last sermon and where my mother lived for decades after his death. So it was a return in so many senses to be able to connect with those events.
Yeah, I remember in the book when your father dies, and I think you had an expectation your mother was going to get out of there as soon as she possibly could, and instead she turns around and loves it for decades, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, she was from the South, and she felt that when she went north with my dad, that she was being held hostage in the North for all those years. She was so glad to be back in the South, and it was perfect for her.
When I think of 9/11, maybe it's because I'm not American, I have a bit of distance from it. And I think about, this memorializing and then every name being said. And I guess there's a part of me that hopes that for people who are doing that they also think about, all those faceless people who die, the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who died afterwards, the Afghanis who died afterwards, and how we don't know their names, and we don't, we put so much more value on our own and their lives. And, I think even growing up, there was this idea that I hope the Holocaust is not just our lesson, but is the lesson for everyone about all of this. and how we solve our problems, so to speak, and how horrific it can be, but also how there's also beauty in the world. So I wonder, when a parent dies, there can be a flowering of compassion for the other, but for really the other, like all other. And I wonder, in terms of the compassion part of who you are, how has that grown in those 20 years?
Wow, that's a, a very deep question. um, well, one of the things, and I have to agree with your premise that what seems most proximal, nearest to us, always takes on greater proportions. It's much harder to have empathy for someone who's not there, or someone who's different, or someone who's far away. It takes a little extra effort, or someone who we just don't agree with, or we come from a different culture. All of those things are true. It takes a little extra effort. And I won't hold myself up as a paragon of empathy and compassion, but what I've learned about it, what I'm trying to teach myself. In fact, someone recently told me that every book is, or every self-help book, the person who gets the most help is the author, right? So this isn't a self-help book, but there are pieces of it. I was a teacher, and I was just out for a walk this morning. I said, I just realized this book is just another form of teaching. And this is a truism also, these teachers learn by teaching, and they may learn more than their students. So in that regard, by writing this book and describing a path from separation through compassion to connection, I realized that that's work that I continue to need to do. And I hope that I've made some progress in recognizing the opportunities there.
Well, sometimes it's these events, huge or personal, that give us enough pause to allow some space for these parts of ourselves to grow. When we're 32 years old and it's all about our careers and we're marching along in the world, it can be a less generous time for a lot of us. And, when we see people pass, I think we have that opportunity to be able to say, this is just a flicker of the eye and life is over, and we have to appreciate it. What do you want people to get most out of what you've written here?
Before I respond to that, what you just said triggered a thought about Reb Zalman's works and the aging to saging. And maybe this is the message as much as anything else, that the fact that as we get older, he would say, of course, that the body may not be able to do everything it could do, but that doesn't mean that the spirit can't continue to grow. And then he provided processes for taking advantage of, hopefully, some greater wisdom in old age. And part of that was harvesting lessons from the past and recontextualizing issues and events and feelings from the past, and say, hey, maybe that argument I had back then, or the embarrassment I suffered back then, wasn't as terrible as I thought it was. Maybe I learned something from that I can bring forward. And so a good portion of this book is that kind of recontextualizing, looking at the past. Not only do I go into that time frame of 2001, but there are flashbacks in the book that go further into our family history and describe who we are and how we got to be who we are. To be able to go back there and with Rahmanis, with compassion, and say, okay, maybe that wasn't so bad, and here's what I can learn from that. And then the other thing that Reb Zalman would say is, you also have an opportunity to look ahead and say, how am I going to leave a legacy? What can I do of value and of beauty that I can leave behind that will last longer than I do? And so in some ways, and there are probably other lessons, but I have modeled that behavior actually unwittingly. I didn't say, oh, let me put Reb Zalman's principles to work. It's just, it was a natural thing. I needed to look at this story. I needed to learn from it, and I needed to write it down. And if nobody else reads it, I hope my family does, but I hope other people do as well. So that in itself, to me, is a valuable way of looking at our eldering, the fact that we can make something out of it more than just the remorse from the past and the fear of the future.
Beautiful, beautiful. Unthinkable Dreams, The Year That Mom Died and the Towers Fell, by Yesh and his previous book, A Precious Heritage. How do people get Unthinkable Dreams?
One easy way is to go to my webpage, which is yeshindeed, YESHINDEED.com. And the prompts on, as soon as you get to the website, will take you right to an opportunity to order it. And, well, I don't know when you're going to air this. Right now, there's a discount code. Maybe I'll see if I can get another one going.
So yeshindeed.com, right?
Yeshindeed.com. Yesh indeed.
Yesh indeed. Yesh, thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you, and congratulations on a beautiful podcast and your book, and looking forward to the day we get together. We're too far away, also.
Wouldn't it be lovely? I'll come to California once this crazy is over, because it's. I'll come in the winter. I'll put it that way. I could appreciate it by then.
Very good idea.
Yes, I think so.
We have a guest room.
Yeah, I'll be there, Ma. So, folks, thank you so much for listening. I'll remind you, if you want to support Not That Kind of Rabbi, patreon.com/NTKR. Any amount per month is lovely, and I appreciate it. My book is called I Thought He Was Dead. It's available on Indigo Chapters. It's available on Amazon. It's available from Woolsack and Wynn, my publishers as well. So take a look, have a listen, enjoy. Take care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Yesh.
My pleasure.